All right, thanks a lot, Dan, and good afternoon, everybody. After last year's record-breaking hurricane season, we're going to be having a really packed week this week, so I'm glad everyone was able to join. I think we're going to have record attendance on our webinar all this week. Definitely want to thank our presenters. They're going to have some really detailed introductions for each of our presenters. Today, we're going to hear from the Director of the Florida Division of Emergency Management, Kevin Guthrie, and also the Director of the National Hurricane Center, Ken Graham. And also this afternoon, we're going to be hearing from the Chief Meteorologist with the State Florida Division of Emergency Management, Amy Godsey. And as mentioned, I'll be talking a little bit more about their background coming up before each speak. But what I wanted to do is kind of give a brief overview. You can see the slide on your screen, the remainder of the week. So again, we're going to have our distinguished speakers speaking today. And then for the remainder of the week, we're going to be focusing on impacts, messaging, and also threat from tropical hazards, including the wind threat on Tuesday, tomorrow. We'll be talking about storm surge on Wednesday, rainfall on Thursday, and ending the training session on Friday with the tornado threat. So now I'd like to introduce one of our three distinguished speakers. This will be Kevin Guthrie, Director of the Florida Division of Emergency Management. Kevin has more than 30 years of experience in public safety and emergency management in the state of Florida, including 14 years of experience dedicated to emergency management. Kevin spent 23 years as a police officer and emergency preparedness coordinator with the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office and served as the Public Safety Emergency Management Director for Flagler County Board of County Commissioners. Now, I remember Kevin when he was in Pasco County. Kevin then served as the Assistant County Administrator for Public Safety for Pasco County. And in that role, he was also responsible for all emergency services, fire rescue, and the 911 Communications Center departments. In October 2018, Governor Rick Scott appointed Kevin as Chief of Staff for the Florida Division of Emergency Management. And in January of 2019, Governor Ron DeSantis appointed him as Deputy Director of the division. As deputy, Kevin focused on coordinating efforts among all state agencies, counties, and municipalities in dealing with natural and man-made disasters to ensure that all of Florida is prepared and ready to respond. And during the state of Florida's COVID-19 response, Kevin served as the Deputy State Coordinating Officer and the State Emergency Response Team Chief. And I think, as we all know, Kevin has won numerous awards for his efforts and success in emergency management, including the Chad Reed First Responder Award from Governor Rick Scott and the Presidential Call to Surface from President Barack Obama. I'll turn it over to welcome Kevin, and welcome again, Kevin.
Thank you, Brian. Just want to do a sound check, make sure you can hear me all right. Good?
Sounds good.
All right. All right, thank you, Brian. And thank you for that introduction. And I'll just let the people in control of the screens let you know that I do not actually have a PowerPoint. Amy will when she comes back up. So don't want you to think that I'm not sharing anything on purpose. So again, thank you for having me. This is quite the honor. Honestly, this is the biggest group of people outside the 1115 county call that I talked to or have talked to so far. In fact, we may have more people on this. I guess it's because Dan Noah was on the call. Everybody likes Dan, and so at least that's going to be, I follow Dan Noah. That's what I'm going to go with. So thank you again. Appreciate the opportunity. So as Brian mentioned, I took over as director for the Florida Division of Emergency Management on May the 1st. My role here is obviously, the textbook definition is to help the division and for Florida to be in a situation to respond to, prepare for, recover from, mitigate against disasters. That's the textbook definition. But realistically, what I want to do as the director here is pretty much threefold. I want us to continue to engage technology. We've been able to do a lot of technology engagement over the last year, whether that's on the GIS Esri platform, whether it's on a Salesforce platform, which we're using internally to replace a lot of our antiquated systems, whether we continue to use WebEOC, and so on. Weatherstem is another one that's been a big issue for us. I'm sure Amy's going to talk a lot more about that in her presentation. Secondly is process improvement. We have we have to say we're a state government and we're bureaucratic is probably the understatement of the millennium. But what we want to be able to do is streamline those processes, procedures. We have been fast in the last 2.5 years. I mean, especially people usually judge us on our recovery, not necessarily on our response. So if you put us in the recovery limelight, we have pushed out almost $5 billion in the last 2.5 years. That is insane for this division. We've never had a time period like that before in our history. And we want to continue. We did that by streamlining process. We did that by changing policy. So we want to continue to engage that and be better at streamlining processes, documentation, process improvement. The last thing that, in addition to technology and the process improvement, is I want to do profession development. And again, I said profession development, not professional development. Where I want to make that delineation is we as an emergency management, I believe, and certainly the National Weather Service is right there with us as a partner in that. I think a lot of people look at us as the hurricane police, especially in Florida. They think of emergency management as a career, but then I ask the question, what is emergency management? And when you think about emergency management from a profession development, it's more about project management. There's very little that we do here that doesn't involve some type of project management, but yet the division has no project management professionals. So we want to go down that path. We want to start looking at degrees outside of the emergency management degree. We want to start looking at, again, as I sit here in the room around me, I have a meteorologist, I have somebody that's in journalism, creative writing. We want to look at accountants, CPAs, if you will, attorneys. These are all, contract development. There's a myriad of things we do in emergency management that are not what people would consider the traditional emergency management. So those are some things that I want to do in the future, and that's the way we're going to take the division. I'll probably talk about some more of those as we go along in further detail. One of the things that I hope to get to in this briefing is, in addition, is the Amazon culture. I think that's the hardest thing that you're going to have to deal with, that we're going to have to deal with in emergency management over the next decade, is how do we do emergency management? How do we do the things that you guys deal with at the National Weather Service in this Amazon culture? So again, just a little bit of a tease there as we'll delve into that a little bit more. So let me get back to, I talked a little bit about technology. I mentioned that we have WebEOC, we have the Salesforce platform that we're using here. We have other technology platforms. I really want to include Weatherstem. I want us to continue developing that. The thing about technology is I'm not a tech guy. I know that I want to engage it, but I don't know exactly what is out there. So, Weatherstem is probably one of those great examples. We knew of Weatherstem. We didn't really know what all it could do for us. But then as Amy started, working with them and bringing that into our division, certainly gave us much more accurate, detailed information. As Brian alluded to, I used to be the assistant county administrator in public safety inside of Pasco County. I'm at a point now where I wished I had a Weatherstem station on all 26 fire stations. It was actually a fire station's Weatherstem piece of equipment that actually assisted me in a lawsuit, of which I can't technically talk about just yet, but it gave me a lot of data for the decisions that were made at the time. So that's just, again, being able to embrace that, engage that technology. We want to continue to be on the cutting edge of that. During COVID, we were able to engage a timekeeping system and the ability for individuals that were working for us to be able to come in and scan their phone and accurately create their time, which led to better invoicing. We were actually recognized nationwide for that timekeeping system, and rumor has it that we may have won the technology award through that particular vendor. Again, I guess I can't really talk about that just yet, but rumor has it that we may have won. So So again, that's a little bit deeper dive on the examples of technology. Process improvement is process improvement. So let me talk more a little bit about leadership and the profession development. As the division continues to grow and expand, and we find out what it is that we need to do in the future, then we have to be willing to go out there and see what it is that we need to engage. Let me give you an example. Inside of COVID-19, our systems from a cyber level were more exposed than they've ever been exposed before. We were constantly getting bombarded with phishing attacks and ransomware attacks and things of that nature. We were able to keep all of those at bay, but at the same time, what do we have in this house that will help us Okay, I think I'm unmuted again. I hope so. All right. So again, as we were talking about the cyber issue in the middle of COVID-19, we have to be able to engage that sector, if you will. And again, profession development is being willing to expand to go into areas that we don't necessarily know about, and how we can pull that expertise into our building and make sure that we are no longer or that we can protect ourselves from that particular threat. Another thing that we have to do is or along those same lines is getting those individuals into getting those individuals underneath our roof that we don't know about, right? So engineers, how do we engage engineers? How do we engage again, it's just no longer the public safety sector. It's not police and fire and ambulances. It's bringing those individuals, to include you guys, into the fold. So as we do this every year, you know, we bring into the State Emergency Operations Center, we bring individuals from National Weather Service Tallahassee right in here to help back us up and provide us more depth on inside of our EOC. And again, that's just another example. As we get ready to go into this year's hurricane season, and we continue to recruit new individuals to the field, we have to go out and figure out what it is how do we message, right? How do we message to those individuals that we're looking for them? That's a challenge that we're going to have in the future. We need to continue to figure it out and move forward. But again, identifying skills, identifying the individuals that we need to talk to. Let me go to the Amazon culture and talk a little bit about that. As we move into this area, emergency managers and those in the emergency management field are constantly being bombarded by, why is that 30-foot debris pile still outside my door? When is it going to get picked up? One of the things that in this Amazon culture is that people expect that to be gone tomorrow. If not tomorrow, by no later than the next day. So how are we going to do that? And I know that's important to you guys, because when the next storm comes along, you don't want that debris sitting around becoming missiles and going into somebody's home and creating a cascading problem. But at the same time, I think we have to be better at not managing expectations, but as I've said in the past, I'll say again here, we have to be better at setting expectations. You know, I know Ken Graham is going to come up and talk after me, but Ken is constantly telling me and Jared, my predecessor, look, the best I can give you right now 5 days out is X. He sets that expectation, right? He doesn't manage it, he sets it. And I think that's a classic example where we have to do better at setting the expectation instead of managing the expectation. Managing that expectation is, I'm going to get you better data over time. Setting that expectation is, there's nothing I can do for you today. We're going to have to wait till tomorrow to see what comes out. So again, setting that expectation. At the division, we continue to be, strive to be effective in what we do on response to debris removal. but we also acknowledge that there's a challenge that the residents expect, again, is going to be instant. It's going to be, why do I not have food and water delivered to my house? Grubhub can do that. Why can't that happen in a disaster? Power, again, that's another one that's, how fast is the power going to come back on? People don't understand, and again, set the expectation of how the power is restored. Before or I shouldn't say as I wrap up, let me talk a little bit about, and I know I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here, but hurricane preparedness messaging and supply kits. As we move into preparedness, for you all to be effective at what you do, you must have your family plan ready to go. I think all of us on this call today, especially on this call today, is we understand that, especially in Florida, tropical cyclone is a risk. It's not the only risk. Flooding continues to be our #1 risk and threat. We face that all the time. But in addition to that, we have tropical cyclones. We have fire weather. We have severe weather that comes through, it seems like here recently, just about every day. So we have got to be prepared ourselves. So let me talk first of all about some reminders. And again, I hate to be redundant, especially with this crowd, but I think it bears repeating. The very first thing that you need to do if you haven't done it, and I think a lot of people forget about this, is your insurance. And I ask you the question, when is the last time you had a homeowner's insurance update on your house? You actually called your insurance agent, had them come out, or you did something over the phone and you said, do I have enough coverage on my home to rebuild the home? So let me give you an example. Just last month in April, I called my insurance agent. I said, look, bought my house for X, it's now appraised at Y. Do I have enough coverage to rebuild my home under this current condition, especially with the construction prices the way they are? And she says, Kevin, absolutely not. We need to look at increasing your policy probably about 15, 20%. And I said, well, then let's do that. Because again, pennies on the dollar will help us or help me recover from a disaster if I should be the victim of that. So again, make sure you have an insurance checkup. For you all that don't know, National Flood Insurance. National Flood Insurance policy has got to be in effect for 30 days before it'll actually take effect and pay out. So it's not too late to get flood insurance for hurricane season. So please look at flood insurance. For instance, I live inland. I'm Tallahassee inland in a 1,700, 1,800 square foot house. My insurance policy for national flood insurance on my property is only about $250 a year. So depending on where you live, it doesn't necessarily cost that much when you consider that the average payout for FEMA in a disaster, if you in the state of Florida, is about $4,000. The maximum payout that you can get from FEMA in a disaster, if you max grant everything that they have available, you're looking at $36,000. So you want to make sure that you have insurance, because nobody can rebuild their home on $4,000 or even $35,000, $36,000. So please make sure that you have an insurance checkup. Look at flood insurance. As I've heard Dan Noah say many, many times, if it rains, it can flood at your property. So we certainly understand that. After you do that, I would encourage you to, build that kit, if you will. A lot of people, I think we've done a bad job of, maybe we've managed expectations, saying that people need to know that they need to have 3 to 5 days. The state of Florida has now started saying 7 days worth of supplies, and I'll get into that in a second. But I think people think there's got to be this bag or this box of stuff, right? I would argue that 70% of Americans live paycheck to paycheck. So I argue, instead of buying this time of year, instead of buying fresh fruits, fresh vegetables, fresh meats, start shifting to canned fruits, canned vegetables, canned meats, non-perishables. You're going to have to buy food anyway for your family. Just change the way the style, right? Instead of fresh, go to canned. And that way, if you do have to evacuate and you do need to go for 3 to 5, 7 days, You can take what's on the shelf, throw it in a grocery bag, and you're out the door. Another thing that I would encourage you to do in your preparedness package is create a checklist. I know this seems rather elementary, but I can tell you, for me, checklist works the best, because when I'm in the middle of trying to do something that's important for my family, and I'm checking on my mom and dad, my brother, my sister-in-law, if I don't have a checklist, I'm all over. I'm just a scatter plot, if you will, in my brain. I'm all over the place. So having that checklist, knowing what you need to get as you go out the door, I need to get my birth certificate. I need to make sure I got my driver's license. I need to make sure that I have my non-perishable goods. I need to have the insurance policy, those pictures, certain pictures of my house that I cannot replace. Having that checklist of getting that stuff to the car when you need it is going to make you much more successful. And again, maybe this is not for you, maybe it's for your family member. So please, again, consider those things. Just want to make sure I got all of my notes. So let me talk about the 3 to 5 days and 7 day. So the state of Florida, if you've seen me in the media lately, I've started pushing, instead of 3 to 5 days, I've started pushing 5 to 7, really focusing on the 7 day mark. You might say, well, Kevin, why is that? Why are FEMA saying 3, you're saying 5 to 7? What's the difference? Well, I think what we have to do is, FEMA's got a guideline and a policy out there that says you should have, or a recommendation that says you should have three days of food. What we've done in Florida is we've gone to our last 5-6 hurricanes over time, and we have determined that it's closer to the average of 5 days to get the power back on, or 7 days if you live in a rural area. So what we have started doing is we've started messaging that. Again, not managing the expectation, but setting the expectation. So if you live in a rural area, based on the way that electrical infrastructure is brought back online, it goes from high transmission lines to the substations, to the feeder lines, to the actual residential. If you're in a situation like we were in the Panhandle, and you have miles and miles and miles of infrastructure that's got to be rebuilt for one home, versus a half mile of infrastructure that's got to be rebuilt for 1,000 homes, the 1,000 homes are always going to get priority over that one home. So again, you need to know your situation. You need to know what you're living in, so that you can have the right amount of food, water on hand for your family. As we talked about being prepared, the national tax holiday is coming up. I should say the state tax holiday is coming up. That is coming up the week of May 28th through June the 6th. The governor will be signing that sometime soon, but those are the weeks. So again, you're gonna have a tax-free opportunity to go out and get some items for your home and build your preparedness kit. So again, as I start to wrap up here, I don't know exactly where I'm at on time, but the division, we're going to continue to focus on technology. We're going to focus on process improvement. We're going to focus on making sure that we're ready to respond and have a very develop the profession here, and make sure that we're ready to respond to, recover from, mitigate, protect against hurricanes and all disasters inside of Florida. Again, Brian, thanks for having me on. I will stand by. I know that I think we have a Q&A session towards the end of this, so I will look forward to any of those questions. Thank you.
All right, thank you again, Kevin. It's great having you in the state director role, your experience, and also your talented team in place at the Florida Division of Emergency Management in Tallahassee. Thank you again. Up next, it is my pleasure to introduce a longtime colleague and trusted friend, the director of NOAA's National Hurricane Center, located in Miami, Florida, Ken Graham. After serving as a broadcast meteorologist in Mississippi, Ken began his federal career with NOAA in 1994 as a meteorologist at the National Weather Service in New Orleans, a location where he later returned as the office director and meteorologist in charge. Ken's career took him to many critical positions in the agency, including the National Weather Service Southern Region Headquarters in Fort Worth as a Marine Program Manager, and later the Systems Operations Division Chief. Ken served as the meteorologist in charge of 3 National Weather Service offices in Corpus Christi, Texas, Birmingham, Alabama, and New Orleans, Louisiana, where he helped all three offices earn the Department of Commerce Medal for Innovative and Life-Saving Services and many other awards and recognitions focusing on hurricane decision support services and also the 2010 Deepwater Horizon disaster in the Gulf of Mexico. Ken also had a leading regional role during Hurricane Katrina in 2005 in providing resources and repairs for critical infrastructure in the National Weather Service and NOAA in the New Orleans area. Ken also worked at the National Weather Service headquarters up in Washington, D.C. as the Chief of Meteorological Services, and also often briefed congressional committees on behalf of the National Weather Service. In Ken's current role as Director of the National Hurricane Center, he has been a leading force in messaging and communicating high-impact information to the emergency management community, the media, and the general public. Ken will be sharing lessons learned from last year's record-breaking hurricane season. Welcome to Ken Graham.
Thank you, Brian. Appreciate those great words, and hopefully everybody can hear me okay. Director Guthrie, wonderful words for everybody. Appreciated those words, and I deeply appreciate our relationship with the National Hurricane Center and definitely the weather forecast offices, such as where Dan Noah is over in Tampa. We definitely appreciate the relationship that we have with you, definitely at the state. So some of the things I wanted to cover today, a little bit about the 2020 season and really some thoughts going forward into the 2021 season, a little bit of what's new from us at the Hurricane Center, but also some, you can call them lessons learned, just looking back at the season, just really so much took. There we are. It muted on its own, so maybe that's already some feedback on this presentation, but hopefully not. So just a few of the 2020 records, just absolutely, incredible. I mean, you look back at the relentless season of 2020, there were so many records I could at least fill 4 or 5 separate slides on the records looking back, but the 6th straight year with at least one named storm prior to the official start of the Atlantic season. 30 storms, 30 named storms. That's the most we've recorded in 170 years of record keeping. 14 hurricanes, 7 major, 22 of those storms required watches and warnings for land areas or made landfall. So just a relentless season that just kept on continuing through the entire time. Most U.S. landfalls with 11, that beats 9 back in 1916. And you can see some of the tropical storms and hurricanes and the landfalls that we had with some of the names there. It's just absolutely a staggering amount of names. Just the second time in history, 2005 was the first one, 2020 the second, that we actually ran out of names and went to the Greek alphabet, and I'll have more about that coming up at the end of the presentation. It's only the second time on record that we've had 5 or more tropical cyclones at the same time. And Dan Brown's with me here. You're out of computers, you're out of people, you're out of everything. Aircraft, hurricane hunters, we're about out of everything when you start getting that many storms at the same time. And that was definitely a all hands on deck moment for us at the Hurricane Center and across the Weather Service. And a tie from 1886 to 1985 for the most hurricane landfalls in a season. Interesting enough, with us at the Hurricane Center, we cover a huge area from the African and European coast all the way to 140 west out in the Pacific. We had 13 international landfalls, 2 of those Cat 4 in Nicaragua, 2 weeks apart and only 15 miles apart with Eta and Iota. So that was a devastating event for some of the countries in Central America. We also had subtropical storm Alpha made landfall in Portugal. So we do the coordination with those countries. Okay, definitely unmuted. And moving on to the next graphics. So just one more page of the records. I literally could have added so many of these. One of the highest storm surge events for Louisiana, and some of the media interviews that we've been doing, just trying to put some perspective on this, somewhere between 17.1 feet to 18 feet of storm surge, just a staggering amount of storm surge. Hurricane hunters, it wasn't just the Hurricane Center, the weather forecast offices and across NOAA and emergency managers that were busy. Everybody was so busy, but the hurricane hunters as well. For the Air Force, only 85 in 2005 were higher number of hours flown. So it was third in their record keeping. For NOAA, the Aircraft Operations Center in Lakeland, Florida, the highest ever, 681.3 hours. It's 110% higher than the average. So just absolutely an incredible amount of flight hours for those folks. And all this done during a pandemic, which made everything more complicated, and with safety procedures in place to keep the hurricane hunters in flight. For us at the Hurricane Center, 639 advisory packages in the Atlantic only. Remember, we have the Pacific as well. The average for us is 322 advisory packages. So quite a bit of products and services coming out of this building. For the first time, we had 2 major hurricanes in November and the latest Category 5 on record. As everybody's seeing the graphics, I can see is that it reaches everyone's screens there, deep into 2 alphabets. As I mentioned, this is what the season looked like when you look at the tracks. A couple things to notice, definitely for the Gulf of Mexico. Look at the concentration of storms in the Gulf, just absolutely relentless season for the Gulf of Mexico, with places like Louisiana seeing 4 landfalls, but impacts from more than 4 storms, but 4 landfalls in that state, including some significant, a couple major storms as well. Here's another way to look at it, looking at some of the satellite images of some of the storms. They all look so different, but just another way to put the whole season in perspective. Just interesting to look at the regular names and then get into the Greek alphabet names. A lot of these very well-defined hurricanes, as you can see from these satellite images. 10 named storms formed in September, and that's where I was mentioning the 5 active Atlantic tropical cyclones from September 14th to the 15th. I had 5 at the same time, and that's not an outlook that we ever want to see. I'm looking over at Dan, you just kind of reflect back at the season, and it was just a relentless season. So you can kind of look at what that outlook looked like during that period of time. And this is just something that doesn't happen very often. 7 named storms in October and November. Usually we start to see some tapering off when we get into October, definitely by November. We could definitely get storms as they recurve back towards the east, but just a very active portion of the season, October and November, still dealing with quite a few storms. I did want to mention it's a whole team effort, and it's not just right there on the coast, it's also the inland watches and warnings. You can see the different colors here, the hurricane warnings in orange, but look at the tropical storm warnings in yellow, how far they extend inland. So this is part of the outreach that we talk about, that these hurricanes and tropical systems, it's not just coastal, it's well inland. And what a team effort with the weather forecast offices, the Weather Prediction Center with the rainfall forecast, Storm Prediction Center with the tornado forecast. I heard later on in the week you'll be talking about the tornado threats. So we just appreciate the collaboration that we have with the weather forecast offices, kind of like back in Tampa with Dan Noah and others, Brian. We communicate constantly during these events, and you can see just what it takes to get people warned. But look, this is a staggering statistic. U.S. coastal hurricane warnings in effect for 15.7 days. We had hurricane warnings up. I don't think that's ever been much higher than that. Coastal watches and warnings in effect for Louisiana for 19.75 days. Just a staggering amount of time. So you think about activations, you get those watches and warnings up, you start having those EOC activations. That's a lot of time to be activated during the season. And interesting enough, 14 systems required issuance of watches and warnings on the first advisory. So these are systems developing near the coast, getting geared up close to the coast, and that always kind of shrinks some of those timelines. Active, and that's a question that we get quite a bit. It just seems to be an active period. This is an interesting one here. Going back to 2017, 14 hurricanes have made landfall in the United States since 2017. 6 of those were major. Total U.S. damage, $353 billion from these storms. The number of billion-dollar storms, 12, and the number of $10 billion storms, 6. So when the question does come up about has this been active, it absolutely has. That's a staggering to look at those tracks, to look at those storms, and some big ones in there too with some of those major hurricanes. It really has been an active period going back to 2017, and it continues to be through 2020. And we'll see what happens in 2021. So I did want to mention this. This has been a frequent question that we've been getting, and I definitely wanted to talk about it a second. There's been some questions about, in Florida last season, we had, of course we had Ada, we had some impacts with Isaias coming up the coast, riding up the east coast of Florida, and we've had some of those impacts, had heavy rainfall and some others. But I think it's a saying that I've always talked about is little wiggles matter. And it's just when you talk about preparedness, if the community seems like, well, it wasn't too bad for us last year, it wouldn't take much of a change to really make that a different situation. So the high pressure out in the Atlantic, the ridge, weaken it some, and those storms would have recurved earlier towards Florida. Or if you think about that whole high pressure out in the Atlantic, maybe moving towards the east, it wouldn't take much of a global pattern to really put Florida right in the heat of the battle last season. So it's something to think about. Use this as an outreach tool if you'd like, but this is something that we're telling folks during the preparedness part of the season as we are now. Think about it. Yeah, we didn't have some of those direct impacts like some of the other states did, but it wouldn't take much of a shift to really put Florida in the middle of all of these. So it's something to remember as we go forward. You can see some of the activity there. We'll put some cities on there as well. So something to think about. Use it as an outreach tool if you think this would help. But again, we always talk about it only takes one, and this is another example of just a little shift, and it would have made a big difference. I did want to talk about how we had to shift. Speaking of shifts, it's a normal preseason for us is very, very active. It's going out with the hurricane hunters. It's meeting people. It's the emergency management training in the building here. We have so much outreach that we do in the preseason to get people ready. The media interest, not just in the United States, but international. We work with them in news conferences and presentations and so forth. A typical June 1st at the Hurricane Center looks like this, where we have a lot of interest kicking off the season, looking at what's upcoming and what's new, kind of a presentation like this as we try to talk about with the media as well. Things sure changed. And I know the emergency management community, I have so much respect for you all. Going into that season, dealing with the pandemic, you're already dealing with the disaster, going into further disasters, and that's never an easy thing. We adjusted. We did everything we could to keep ourselves safe, to make sure we can keep the public safe. We converted a lot of the outreach to basically kind of like what we're doing today, created a virtual hurricanes at home, just a huge effort to get into the classrooms to talk about hurricane safety with the kids, and reached, I don't know what the final numbers were, 4,000 or 5,000 students in English and Spanish throughout that period of time. So absolutely impressive. You can see the middle picture there. We took steps like a lot of you, one-way hallways. That blue tape, we put tape around the hurricane specialist, and during any sort of tropical situation, if they're on shift, you're not allowed to step in that blue line, staying away from each other the best that we could and distancing, and we moved computer consoles to different locations. So, and a lot of the operations, some of it was at home. We actually were able to develop basically redefine how we do some of these operations to have some of that actually conducted at people's homes to keep safe. And in the end, it really worked. Cohort scheduling, some of the shift changes here at the Hurricane Center were conducted from the parking lot into the building, so people would limit who they were with, basically in pairs, cohorts of 2, to limit that contact. You can see some of the items there that a lot of you all did too, but we did everything we could to keep ourselves safe, to make sure we kept going last season. So a record season of 30 storms in a pandemic, that was something to get through last season, as a lot of you experienced as well. You can see some of the scenes from inside the Hurricane Centers, the staff keep us safe the best that we could. Pre-deployment for our COOP, there was we get a lot of questions about how we got through the season. We actually pre-deployed one of the specialists up to College Park, Maryland. They were actually up there just in case we did lose the building for a short period or a long period of time. They'd be in a position to be able to continue those operations as we regrouped and got things going again. We didn't have to use it, but they were actually able to share the workload. So in that regard, that was a very good thing. Some other challenges, and we'll get into some thoughts for 2021. Aircraft reconnaissance, just I can't describe how heroic these folks are getting into the center of the storm. They get us the data that we need. It's the observations, it's the radar from the NOAA plane, the P3. We get the structure of the storm. It helps out so much for us. But being a pandemic, it was difficult in certain situations with the workload alone from the record season, but forward deployment limitations because you can't land at every location like we used to throughout the islands in the Caribbean. So it was a little more difficult to be able to find spots for them to land. And by the way, all those flights are all coordinated out of here at NHC. Karka, our Air Force group here, does such a great job working with us as we set the requirements for those flights and look at where we put those drop zones into the hurricanes to get the data we need for the models, and it really makes a big difference. Air Force had to evacuate from Keesler several times because they were threatened by hurricanes basically several times during the season, so they had to bug out and head over to Texas a couple times. So in clearances with other countries, everything was more difficult. But again, a shout out to those folks, real heroes. Despite all that, we were able to get them out there, and they got us incredible amounts of data that we need to get the job done. So I'm going to move into a few thoughts going forward into the 2021 season. I think these are, some of these come from the 2020 season, some of these come from past seasons, but when you put it together, there's some real things that stand out to me that I wanted to share with everybody. The number one here is words matter, and you heard Director Guthrie talk about communication. He talked about getting that word out and how important that is, and it is. Words matter. And I want to just a quick case study with Hurricane Laura with a forecast of 15 to 20 feet above ground storm surge. I mean, those are words. You get those words out there. They're pretty common. You see them on television. You see them beyond that in social media, and they're in briefings. But it's also, you have a storm surge warning out for those same areas for that incredible amount of storm surge. The other words are, wow, there's still some people in there that haven't evacuated. What do we say? And there was a consideration of what to do, and the word unsurvivable came to mind. And that's not a word we use often, and it still kind of gives me goosebumps to this day just looking at that. But the words matter in getting people out, and the result was no storm surge fatalities. And many of you on here have seen my presentations for a lot of years, and the director also mentioned it. Is the water part of this. Water still, over 80% of fatalities comes from water. And it's, half of that is from the storm surge, another 25 to 27% or so is that inland rain. So it's the water that's really hurting people in the end, causing many fatalities. In the case of Laura, 100% evacuation rate, no storm surge fatalities in that situation. However, the number two consideration going into the next season is the indirect fatalities. Even though we didn't lose folks from the storm surge, there was some significant amount of indirect fatalities that I definitely want to talk about. So there's this whole thing about the storm's past me, I'm safe now. And that is not the case. You look at indirect fatalities, and in many cases in these tropical systems historically, and you're still seeing it, the indirect fatalities often are exceeding the direct fatalities. And it's just the impact of health issues. It's the impact of it's harsh words to say this, but it's real. Using equipment such as a chainsaw for the first time and cutting branches and hitting folks and live wires and etc. So it's the indirect fatalities that we really also want to key on this year. You're going to see a increased effort, I know, to really use social media to get some of that language out there to have people stay safe, definitely after the storm as well. So it's our vulnerable population. We have to continue to talk about that. Checking on your neighbor, that was one of the key points from Hurricane Preparedness Week, was checking on your neighbor, helping neighbor. I can tell you that in Louisiana, when I was there, we had a generator that ran for my family because we didn't have power with a hurricane. And I knew I was still talking to my wife and family, and she said that generator's still running after a day. And on day 2, she said it was still running. I said, well, you haven't added any fuel? She said, no, I haven't put any fuel in that thing. Day 3, it was still running. She kept telling me, no, I haven't added fuel. And I thought I had the most efficient generator ever made on planet Earth with that generator. It ran that a long amount of time. So by the time the hurricane situation was over, I got home, and wow, it was a very special thing when I found out the neighbors were sneaking over there at night filling up that generator with fuel. That's a story that I always tell, and it really hits home in these disasters. So it's helping your neighbor, and you identify the vulnerable population over 60 years old, 8 times as many victims in these tropical systems than under 21 years old. So we got to check on each other. We got to check on the vulnerable population. Indirect fatalities, this slide I think is some very powerful statistics. Hurricane Laura, we had 7 direct fatalities, wind 5, 2 with the rip current, 34 indirect fatalities, 16 of those carbon monoxide generators. So it's something to really message with the generator safety following these storms. And it was interesting, we talked about since 2017, I've already mentioned that we had 14 hurricane landfalls, 6 were major. In that time, it's really interesting to look back since 2017, just an incredible amount of activity. It showed you the slide with how many storms we've had. There's been 7 storm surge fatalities. And if you go back in time, that's the leading cause of fatalities, and you know, over several thousand fatalities over the years. So historically, the storm surge is the leading cause of fatalities in tropical systems. I think we're making a difference. Storm surge watch and warning. We have inundation mapping. We have a whole new way of communicating graphically and otherwise storm surge. I think we're making a difference. We'll see what happens as we go forward. But in the last 4 years, we've lost more people to carbon monoxide poisoning after the storm than we have in storm surge. It's a powerful statement. So we're gonna double up trying to get the word out on the dangers of that carbon monoxide. I think we'll continue to spend time communicating that. Number 3 is an important one as well. I talked about it from a global sense, but it's not just a global sense. Little wiggles matter. They really matter. You know, you can move a hurricane just you know, miles, and you have a big difference on the ground. And look at this from I want to show this from a science perspective. This is Hurricane Laura. You got the purple line there is the actual track of Laura. The dashed line there is a simulated track shifted 20 miles further west. The colors on the ground there, that's the change in the storm surge on the ground if you moved it 20 miles. It's staggering. In some cases, 10 to 15 feet higher with that 20-mile shift. Over in Lake Charles in Louisiana, 3 to 5 feet difference in Lake Charles. In some of those areas, you can see some of those colors up to 10 feet of storm surge difference. So 20-mile wiggle or a wobble can make that big of a difference on the ground. That's the case all on the Gulf Coast and the Atlantic. It's definitely true here in Florida. And it's just something to consider as we go into the season. 2 days out, I can't tell you with 10 or 20 miles where that's going to wiggle and wobble. They're all different, so we got to watch that, and that's why we do it in a probabilistic sense. That's why we run 400 or 500 up to 1,000 different hurricanes go into the calculation for storm surge. Bigger, smaller, left, right, faster, slower, and we get the structure into the model as well. So that's why we do it that way. The goal is to get folks out because we're not going to risk lives based on a little wiggle. Number 4, every storm is so different. Something to remember in the forecast process here, as the intensity of the storm increases, our average track error gets smaller. In other words, the stronger storms, the well-defined storms, our track error is actually going to be better than a storm that's in Genesis phase, just developing. And a lot of times you'll have a center, and Hurricane Sally was one doing this, where the center was jumping around. You know, 5 or 10, 20-mile jump in the center can make a 40 or 50-mile difference in where that storm eventually makes landfall. So that's something to really consider as you think about the uncertainty. And I think Director Guthrie, you mentioned it, setting those expectations. And you know, the stronger storms, we're gonna have those a little better pinned down than we are gonna have the ones that are developing 5-6 days out when they're first developing. You can have a good 400, 500, 600 mile error in some cases, depending on the situation. So just something to remember on when you start thinking about setting expectations and start thinking about the certainty of these storms. And look at the difference. This next slide just really shows that so well. Laura, you know, a lot of consistency in that forecast. Marco interacting with Laura, not much consistency in that forecast. And Sally, where the center is jumping around, very slow storm, just very slow, jumping around. And you can see our forecast actually migrated from west towards the east with time because of that jumping around. So just something to think about. Every storm is so different. We talk about that a lot with the public and how, you know, we talk about the impacts, but the reality is it also plays into the actual science portion of what we do. Every one of these is so incredibly different. Number 5 is important to me because I guess you do this for 27 years. You see all these storms are so different, and I want to stress this really strongly here. Hurricanes don't care about your timelines. And we work exercises. We're a big part of those at the Hurricane Center with everybody. And I would love to, with accuracy, give you 5, 6, 7, 10 days notice on some of these, but sometimes they're just not there. The top image there, that's actually Florence. That's a situation that you can see this thing 5, 10 days out. I will tell you that the day 6 and 7 model tracks were actually recurving this up into the Atlantic. So we frequently get the question about why don't you get the forecast out to 6 and 7 days? It's a little more complicated than that because the error is so huge. So that would have caught people off guard if we went with that. But the bottom image, that's Michael. And that's a case where we had a category 5 hit the coast with 3-4 days notice. They're all different. The rapid intensification situation makes these all completely different. And I think a lot of you have seen the stat that I used quite a bit last year. There's only been 4 category 5 hurricanes to hit the continental United States. Only 4 that we have on record. Every one of them was a tropical storm 3 days prior. So they're all going to be different. You're going to have these that we can see way out there. You're going to have others that are undergoing rapid intensification and basically developing as they come in. And a storm like Michael developed all the way in. Last season, with timelines, it's not just the track, it's also the intensity part of this. 9 storms, 9 tropical cyclones in 2020 underwent rapid intensification. And the bad part is several of those were doing that as they were just before landfall. So they were strengthening, rapidly trying to intensify all the way in. So we had a lot of fluctuations. You can look at some of the values in that list. I don't have to go through all of them, but those are 24-hour intensity changes. And you can see some of the values. Look at Delta. I mean, that one stands out. Looking at that one, 65 knots in the 24-hour change. Eta, Iota, 70 knot changes. That's a lot in 24 hours. That's incredibly strengthening type storm. So the big fear there is they do that close to landfall, and we still talk about planning for 1 up just in case, because the intensity still could be a pretty challenging part of the forecast. The next one, deterministic concerns. Like I was saying, they're all so different. And look at these here. This is some model data that we pulled out of our system for Hurricane Laura, and this is the guidance that we were given in one of the models. Let's just take you through the next three slides. This is 1800Z, August 24th. So if we're looking at this, if Dan Brown or Dan Noah is on shift, you start looking at these, and it looks like Southwest Louisiana is the big concern associated with that. But look what happens to the model guidance with time. This is 0Z, August 25th. You see a little shift to the west, but at the same time, you look at it, most of those model runs from that particular model still focus us on Southwest Louisiana. Look at this one. This is 6Z, August 25th. That model started shifting significantly to the west. The white line there with the hurricane symbol there, that's actually where Laura went. Look where the models were. So, you can't follow just the models. They're gonna, you can chase them. They're gonna do things like this. It could be in either direction. I've seen them slow it up, strengthen the storm. It just depends. They're model runs. So we're not looking at one line per model. We're literally looking at 15, 20 solutions from each of the models. And you start looking at them, the hurricane specialists end up with what, 50, 60 different lines and tracks that they can really look at and start blending those together for the best forecast. So I think it's important to remember that, especially when you start looking at the impact if that storm did move further to the west. It's a lot of storm surges that would have occurred in Texas if it went that way. So as a result, Louisiana had the biggest impacts. We stuck to what we had, and you can see the difference between the left where the models were, the star is where Laura went, and the right is the actual NHC forecast. You're not going to see us jumping all over the place, because as an EM, that's tough to make decisions if we're jumping all over the place. So you will always see a more conservative approach. We'll move it if we have to, but you'll see a more conservative approach depending on the model blends. And this is a great way to show it. I think it's important. The forecast from the National Hurricane Center has a lower average track error and is more consistent than any individual model overall. So you can see the consistency as it increases. You want a low consistency. So you can see the NHC dot right there versus some of the models. So you want to be basically the further down in the lower left is better. So you can see the NHC forecast is more consistent because it's further left on the graph, and it also has less error because it's lower on the graph. So the bottom line is we're blending all those models. Be really careful picking your favorite line because they're going to jump around a little bit, and you just got to be careful doing some of that. We call them the spaghetti plots. They're all over the place, so we're taking those into account. So we definitely like to let everybody know we're looking at all of them. We're blending them together, and the NHC forecast beats the models every time. Why? Well, this is the uncertainty in 1990. Can you imagine that cone? That's what it was. That was the cone back in 1990. And if you go to today, that's the cone today. Actually, probably last year, but I don't think it changed. I don't think it changed that much looking at Dan. So yeah, that's the difference. That's why we take the uncertainty. That's why we take the forecast verification so serious, because we don't want you to have to deal with that big cone. We want you to have to deal with a much more confident type of forecast. And here's why it matters. In 1999, with that big cone, 2.6 million people had to evacuate from Hurricane Floyd. At the time, it was the largest U.S. evacuation in history. But on the right, as we continue to improve the forecast, as many as 3 million probably didn't have to evacuate. So big difference in why we take it so serious. And part of it is the data, part of it is observations, the models, computing power, the hurricane hunters having all that data coming in. I like the lower left one. You can see the radar really helping us with the structure, seeing where those highest winds are. And structure has so much to do with the actual storm surge forecast itself. All right, the last section, then I'll wrap up, is what's new. So what's new? We didn't let the pandemic slow us down. We have a lot of new things that we're putting out for this season. And one of them is continuing something new that was last year. It was a storm surge graphic. And we still want your feedback on this graphic. It's brand new last year. We tried it, and the feedback so far has been extremely positive. Again, storm surge being the leading cause of fatalities historically from 1963 to 2012. This graphic is just a quick way to look at some of the values, to see what they are, see where the trouble spots are, and also the large extent of the storm surge in this case. That's from Hurricane Laura right there, what the graphic looked like. We're going to continue that this year, and if you have comments, definitely taking some feedback on this, but put this in your briefings. You can put that out in social media. It's an easy look. It's low bandwidth. You can put that out there and really share with the public some of the dangers associated with the storm surge. The other part is new for us. I'll wait till everybody can see this because it takes a little longer to do the loop here. Domestic and international coordination was, it's interesting. It was a challenge because we had to change it to more virtual, but in the end, we come out stronger than we've ever been. We're coordinating with the weather forecast offices, Brian, others up in Tallahassee. Florida's got some great weather forecast offices all along the coast. All 122 of them across this country just do such an amazing job working with the local emergency managers and getting the information out. But you can see that the coordination associated with not just the WFOs, but internationally becomes a big factor in these storms. So what was new last season was we had new tools. For the first time ever, we were able to collaborate that forecast domestically with the weather forecast offices and internationally with the Met offices at these different countries, talk about the forecast, talk about our thinking. This was incredible and a best practice. So we're going to do it again in 2021, and I think we're going to expand that to the international community even more. I think Dan Brown here, not Dan Noah, Dan Brown here is really running that for us and trying to expand that quite a bit. The other new here is our tropical analysis forecast branch. Everybody always asks, what do y'all do when there's no hurricanes? Well, a lot. We have a whole group, TAFB, the Tropical Analysis Forecast Branch. They're issuing the surface charts. They're issuing forecast over the oceans, digital forecasts, as you can see in the lower left, over the oceans, where you can get hazards for mariners and shipping and cruise lines and that sort of thing. There's all sorts of information that they send out. And they also send out a spot forecast, an emergency spot forecast for the U.S. Coast Guard, which is an incredible thing that they do to get the information out. So I think that's been pretty handy to pinpoint some of the emergencies over the water. We have a big upgrade to the storm surge model that I think you'll be pretty interested in. Structure matters. It's of course it's the intensity, of course it's the angle of approach. it's the forward speed. All those come into play. But look at the difference between these two hurricanes. The one on the left, just notice the red areas. That's probably the biggest thing to notice right now. That's big time storm surge. And if a stronger storm, so the winds are higher, but a smaller storm on the right, look at the difference in the storm surge. It's closer to the storm, but doesn't have that expanse out further into some of those inlets. This is a real case that happens. So structure matters. The new model is going to take that structure into account better than ever. And that's exciting, not just for accuracy of storm surge, but here's what's big news. Emergency managers always ask, how do we get information further out in our timelines? And I think in this case, right now we issue the storm surge products in the forecast 48 hours out, really looking at that watch phase. For storms that we're confident in, if we're really confident in the storm, like a Laura situation, where we have the structure down, we really have a good idea what the structure is going to be, there may be some cases in 2021 that we can get you that information out to 60 hours. We're excited. It's not going to be every storm because some of them just have so much uncertainty that we don't know how to do that yet. But in some cases, we'll be able to get that to you. I think that's going to be huge to help on some of the timelines. So we'll see how that goes in 2021. Estuary basking and the storm surge model, you can see the difference. There's places that stay full of water and they highlight with storm surge because you are pushing storm surge into those areas, but we really want to focus on places that are normally dry. And that's where you can mask those estuaries, places along the rivers that normally have water on it, so you can really focus the colors on where people are. So I think this masking is going to be better than ever coming this season, so you'll be able to stay tuned for that. And I think just like before, I think you should be able to turn that on and off on the website just like before. And I'm getting to the last few slides here. We already started this, 6 years in a row we've had storms before June 1st. So what we've done for 6 years is we've issued special tropical weather outlooks when something developed before the season. And as a result, you really didn't know when to expect some of these. So I think it's a better service that we can get this information out earlier to you. And it's already started getting that information out with the outlook. We were already doing that in the Pacific. So we just had to extend that to the Atlantic. So you now have the tropical weather outlook for the Atlantic and the Pacific. We're going to begin that, May 15th as we did, and keep that going with time. Greek alphabet. 2020 and 2005 are the only seasons that we've had to use the Greek alphabet. We retired Dorian, Laura, Ada, and Iota. We've never had a situation that we had to retire Greek alphabet names before. So that was part of the decision process. So the retirement of the names, it's all part of the World Meteorological Organization, Region 4 Hurricane Committee. The chair of that committee, there's 28 countries involved with that committee. So it's a vote, but we had issues with translating some of those names into Spanish, French, and Portuguese, the languages that we deal with in our WMO region. The pronunciation of some of the letters in succession, Zeta, Eta, Theta, was problematic. When we got to Zeta, there was confusion with Z, a perception that was the last letter, and it took away from the messages that we wanted to talk about, the impact messages. That's where we want to continue. There was so much focus on the names last year. So what we've done is we have an overflow list. We're not going to use the Greek alphabet any longer. We have an overflow list. This single list will carry through the 6 years. And so if we run out of names again, don't plan on it. I hope we don't run out of names. Looking at Dan once again. So yeah, we don't want to do that. But if we do, we'll start again with A on this overflow list. But it'll be more familiar. So communicating the danger, just wrapping this up. You're going to, our products are for the most part staying relatively the same. Please definitely, if you have questions about these products, talk to us. What the cone is, the wind speed probabilities, and a very popular product, the earliest reasonable time of arrival that lets you know basically when those tropical storm force winds will arrive. Got to have preparedness wrapped up. We hit that hard, not just in our briefings, but the media as well, because that's the timeline that people need to have things finished up. And you can see the storm surge products and the rainfall product from the Weather Prediction Center in there as well. Please use our key messages. It's all about the impacts. We agonize over every one of those words. We really do. We bounce them off each other because the words do matter. Remember, the very number one point and the takeaways for 2020 getting into 2021 was words matter, and it really does. So we really try to highlight the biggest impacts, put it in this product. It goes in briefings, it can get out there on social media, really letting the public know what the things that we're worried about. So that's it. Hurricanes.gov, our website. Go to the weather.gov, the forecast office's website. They have all the local information. You'll probably see some of that this week with what they're most worried about when it comes to the hazards, the hazard graphics. But if you have questions, definitely let us know. And the big thing here is just thank you all for just the outstanding relationship that we have. Just want to continue that and appreciate it with the state down to the county level and the parishes out there. Just thanks for everything. So that concludes my briefing, Brian.
All right, thanks again, Ken. Last year was definitely one to remember, not only for a record-breaking hurricane season, but also the active season combined with the global pandemic impacting all of us, as you mentioned. And as we all say here in Florida, it is important to prepare every year as if it is our year for a landfall here in the state of Florida. So again, thanks again, Ken, and everyone at the National Hurricane Center and all of the National Weather Service offices across the country, working together with emergency management and media to get the message out there to the public. So thanks again, Ken. And up next, it is a pleasure to introduce Amy Godsey. Amy serves as the state of Florida Chief State Meteorologist, frequently briefing the Florida governor and other state leaders on impending weather hazards throughout the state of Florida. Amy has worked for the Florida Division of Emergency Management since 2006 and has been activated in the State Emergency Operations Center for more than 60 events for impacts from tropical cyclones, wildfires, tornadoes, flooding, nuclear power plant incidents, law enforcement support, Deepwater Horizon, and the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic. Through her work and contributions, Amy has been distinguished and certified as a Florida Professional Emergency Manager, a liaison officer on all hazards incident management teams, and the Governor's Hurricane Conference Tropical Meteorology Award recipient. Meteorology also runs pretty deep in Amy's family, as her husband Kelly serves as the senior service hydrologist and a meteorologist at the National Weather Service office in Tallahassee. I'll turn over to now welcoming Amy Godsey.
All right, thanks again for that introduction, Brian. I just want to make sure I have a good audio check and everyone can see my screen.
Sounds good and looks great.
All right, very good. Okay, again, it's a pleasure to be invited to speak to everyone today and go into more detail about what Director Guthrie was discussing earlier on some of the projects related to the Meteorological Support Unit related to hurricane operations and what we're going to do going into to boost us through 2021. I want to start with the Weatherstem project. That is something that can be used at both the state and local levels. So it is definitely a project that can be used in tropical events and also year-round in other events that may impact the state. Of course, we know we're not just a hurricane state, we're an all-hazard state. So we really wanted to partner with Weatherstem to start this project and continue it. This started in 2019, so we're actually going to go through 2021. I'll discuss that here in a few slides. But if you aren't familiar with Weatherstem, they are a company that's been around for at least 10 years. They started in the school system. They have weather stations that have been popping up throughout Florida for at least the past few years and really getting going. You may see them on the Weather Channel, their images popping up from time to time. But essentially, Weatherstem is real-time weather monitoring equipment. They take weather observations in either real time or near real time, meaning less than a minute. There are cloud cameras that stream weather conditions, focusing on the sky, so you can get, again, real-time images of weather impacts or approaching impacts. They have also boosted their alert and safety notifications. Weatherstem and, of course, the division is really into messaging and preparedness, being weather aware, being weather prepared. So Weatherstem focuses on health and safety alert notifications. There's lightning detection alerts, heat level monitoring. both during, of course, the summer events, but also going into sporting venues and some of the tourism and, of course, high impact events that we have in the state. And also radar information. Every station that is installed in the state of Florida has a mobile application, and every unit has its own Twitter handle and Facebook page. Again, this is all in an effort to engage the community, engage emergency managers, engage our residents, to again be engaged for, of course, weather just awareness, get them used to seeing the data, and of course being a reliable source when it comes time for a tropical impact. All right, so this partnership established the Florida Severe Weather Network. And what that became is a legislative appropriation. That's what it was born out of, where the division starts the contract and handles the contract for Weatherstem. And this establishes 50 weather stations across the state of Florida to create a somewhat of a mesonet. It does connect with the existing weather stations in Florida. But what sets this apart is that every unit deployed will be solar powered, cellular connection powered, and also hardened to withstand 185 miles per hour. That was a big thing that we wanted to see. Just again, going on lessons learned, we've always used Weatherstem data in the past. And of course, we did see sometimes where in a high impact event, some of the data would go down either due to loss of internet power, which was landline, or loss of commercial power. Of course, that's when our data is most important. So we wanted to make sure that these units would be able to survive tropical events and of course feed us that data throughout the event. Of course, the real goal for this Weatherstem network is to increase the data for significant events. We've used Weatherstem data in our disaster declarations. Afterward, if there wasn't a pre-landfall declaration granted ahead of the landfall, we have used Weatherstem data to help make our case for a presidential disaster declaration. Of course, it's also been used in other events, and I'll talk about some specific examples here in a minute. But the benefits of all of this is, of course, like I said, community engagement, but it also helps verify National Weather Service warnings or perhaps advisory levels. And again, it's all an effort to increase data. And we do have some rural spots in Florida where there may not be an adequate amount of observing platforms. So again, this helps both DEM and of course the Weather Service when it comes to their warning and observation networks. So I wanted to talk briefly about where we've gone so far. Again, I talked about how this mesonet was established in 2019, and during that fiscal year, we established 48 stations across the state of Florida. Those are in your, that's on this map here, stations highlighted in the green diamonds there. We are currently in phase 2 of our project, again, another legislative appropriation. We're currently in the middle of that project right now, where we have about 23 units installed in the ground and operating, and we do expect to have all 50 installed throughout the state of Florida. Those are those other blue and yellow dots you see on the screen. We do expect to have all 50 installed by August 1st. So I want to talk about, again, some of the benefits and the way we've utilized the Weatherstem data in the EOC. Again, these are hosted by Weatherstem. We've used this in the EOC a lot of times in the tropical events, especially Isaias and Hurricane Sally related to storm surge. We do encourage some of these stations to be along the coast. Many of our local EM directors have chosen coastal locations, which has turned out to be a tremendous benefit for us. Of course, you can see the clouds rolling in, some of the feeder bands, also seeing local beach conditions, and trying to get a real expectation and a real-time glimpse of what's going on. We've also used some of this data at the local level because they all have wind sensors related to evacuations and of course our barrier islands. And having that weather station there near that bridge intersection into a coastal community on the barrier islands has served a great benefit, has certainly decreased the chance of having a local law enforcement out there with a hand anemometer. So anytime that we can help supplement that weather information and automate that so that we're not placing lives in danger, of course, that's always a benefit as well. Briefly talking about non-hurricanes, Again, the benefit here being all hazards. We've caught some tremendous images on some of these cameras as well, including water spouts, which has helped, of course, prompt National Weather Service tornado warnings if they were close to the coast. You know, seeing funnel clouds in the sky. They've caught wildfires in action, multiple wildfires throughout the spring and summer months on our cameras, and also given us some good data. We actually had a tornado here a few months ago, passed less than a quarter mile from the EOC, and our weather station here at the EOC did catch the sharp barometer drop and a spike in winds, again, to help confirm the presence of some type of high impact event or tornadic event along with the camera. So again, going towards phase 3, we were just given this by the Florida legislature for a phase 3. So this will now be stations 100 through 150, or sorry, 101 through 150 for the next fiscal year. That'll start in July and go through the early summer of 2022. Again, another 50 stations. So I wanted to talk briefly about this Weatherstem phase 3 for those who may be interested in a weather unit. You may have noticed from a few slides before, looking at the map of where they've been installed, there still is some opportunities for South Florida regions. Of course, there's a lot of other existing weather networks in South Florida, but again, we've really seen the benefit in rural communities across North Florida and Central Florida that benefit in coastal communities, boosting tourism, especially with the Facebook and the Twitter, being able to show a picture of the beach or potentially showing hazards. So we do want to encourage participation across the entire state. Of course, we're willing to work with any city or county government that's interested in a weather station. So our requirements are really quite simple for one of these stations. All we ask for is a memorandum of understanding or agreement from the recipient, and we prefer that to be county or city government. And basically, it just outlines an agreement to the operations and maintenance costs for years 4 through 10. The initial appropriation is for the first 3 years, plus the hardware itself and the software package that comes with it. So for the first 3 years, the cost is on the state of Florida through this legislative appropriation. But the operations and maintenance costs after that 3-year maintenance contract expires is all what we're looking for a commitment. Those operations and maintenance costs do fluctuate based on how many units you may have in your county. It's roughly $1,800 to $2,000 per year per station. Of course, that can be a separate agreement with Weatherstem after the end of this current project. And the only other requirement we ask of local government is, of course, access to site property for installation purposes and routine maintenance. Every station will get at least an annual checkup, just like your doctor, and they will make sure that the station is operating properly. If something happens to the unit, Weatherstem will deploy technicians out there to get it back up and running as soon as possible. We've had a few stations that have been struck by lightning, and so we've had to go replace some of the components there, but so they're very responsive in terms of maintenance. In terms of site selection, I want to talk about this just for a second. Again, the preference is government-owned property just because of those access issues. We have installed units on private property at whether it's a museum is one of the examples. So it's definitely preferred that we have government-owned property for actual installation, but it's not required. So we're definitely willing to work with anyone if you've got a really good idea for a spot that could use weather station. The other target for us in this project was certainly to look at areas where there's sparse existing weather data. There's may not be many airports in the area, and other stations, either NOAA operated, water management district, or privately owned. We wanted to look and try to target areas where there wasn't that much data. So again, it could be beneficial to the locals and to the Weather Service. Having a Weatherstem unit right next to an airport, while it's doable, may not be as beneficial as it could be in a more rural location, or say in between airports, or especially at the coast. That's another example. So that's it for the Weatherstem unit. Again, we're excited to start phase 3 after the conclusion of phase 2. But again, it really is a mutual partnership and benefit to the entire state of Florida, not just emergency management, but our residents as well. So I hope they continue to be engaged in that aspect. We hope that the data shared, of course, you're free to share this information through your own platforms and messaging capabilities. Again, just an effort to get everyone prepared for hurricane season. And instead of storm chasing, they can just sit at home and watch some weather cameras. So moving over to preparations for 2021. Again, we want to build on the successes we had over the past couple of years. And really, like Kevin was mentioning, leveraging technology, leveraging partnerships to bolster our messaging and bolster our capabilities. So in 2019, we did have some weather service and deployments to the State Emergency Operations Center from various sources. You know, they were weather service employees, but we brought in hydrologists from the River Forecast Center, as well as local meteorologists, you know, native to Florida, that could also talk about the threats and impacts to the state. This was very beneficial for the state. While we do have our own meteorology unit, again, this is all coordinated and integrated with the local National Weather Service offices, so it ensured a coordinated one message focusing on impacts. But it also allowed the opportunity, especially on the hydrology side, to get a little bit more of a deeper dive into local threats, identifying vulnerable areas. When you talk about state assets being pre-staged, strike teams going first out, where are those vulnerable areas likely to be? And of course, having someone at the state EOC to work with our groups, along with the local National Weather Service offices, was again a huge benefit to us here as well. Decision support services for state agencies are both tropical events and non-tropical as well. We certainly have a strong bond with our sister agencies and providing them any support they need in tropical events, certainly for their operations throughout the state, but also non-tropical events. Some of the operations related to ice storms, related to wildfires, that is what we're here for, and we're certainly proud of the partnership we have with the Weather Service to help us with that as well. Talking about messaging, you know, Ken talked about words matter. Words do matter, and we are very cognizant of that at the EOC as well, and in particular my unit. We've seen successes in IPAWS alerts in tropical events as well as COVID, where we've had to do enhanced messaging related to evacuations. We saw that in Hurricane Michael, where people were a little bit hesitant to evacuate. That could continue this year with COVID operations. People just may be hesitant to leave their homes and go into a shelter again or evacuate to another area. So again, going into the more targeted messages with IPAWS is a potential avenue for us to talk about evacuations and sheltering operations. So that's certainly at the forefront of our mind as well. And we work with our communications office to talk about, you know, the highlights and what could be the best message for those in the impacted area. Talking about leveraging technologies, you know, the Weather Service has also increased their capabilities, certainly in terms of graphical presentation, the way, you know, social media works right now. You know, pictures matter too. Words matter certainly, but pictures are certainly the era, you know, the avenue that most people go to. They want to see an image. So while the Weather Service is increasing their capabilities on that, the state and DEM saw a little bit of a gap in terms of a statewide picture. Certainly at DEM, we're looking at statewide and regional type impacts, and we have to be prepared for a statewide impact, or, you know, shifting resources from one region to another. So there was somewhat of a gap in terms of taking those Weather Service high resolution data and making it more of a statewide picture. When you start piecing together 7 Weather Service offices, sometimes it can get a little staggered in terms of they may not overlap completely or seamlessly at least. So in-house, we've started developing our own high resolution statewide graphics. Of course, these are all based on National Weather Service data, so they won't be any different from what you would normally see from the National Weather Service. But we did take a few liberties in terms of the color ramps And this is all an effort to highlight areas of concern. So we're trying to do focus areas, certainly the brighter colors that may make it stand out versus 20 shades of the same color. That's all an effort of trying to increase our communications as well to our local partners to make sure people can identify and focus any potential threat areas through our graphics. We're continuing to expand those graphics, working with the Weather Service and some of their GIS data, and we hope to put these on a web apps soon. Certainly you would see these in our packets and our briefing packets that are emailed if you are on our list. But we want to make this accessible, obviously, through our website as well, to be able to make sure that anyone that wanted to use them at a local county level would be able to use them. Of course, we're also focusing on mutual aid. We've had some EMAC deployments to other states and other regions here in the last few years. And so while we may not deploy physically, but we have virtual deployment capabilities just like the Weather Service does. And we, of course, are able to support our field teams no matter where they are in the country. So again, not just Florida weather, but trying to expand our knowledge and capabilities as it relates to mutual aid and deployments to other areas of the country is what we're gearing towards. So that's all I had for today, but again, I really appreciate the time for everyone to listen more about the Weatherstem project and what we're doing in the state EOC. Certainly I'll be around for any questions, but I am the point of contact for Weatherstem contract. So if you have any specific questions, you can email myself. We can get you the necessary documentation if you're interested in phase 3.